All right, thank you very much for joining me. Welcome to the rise and benefits of robotic process automation. And Adam, thank you very much for that fantastic intro. Happy to speak with you today. So a little bit about myself. So as you might tell from my gear, I work for M&T. It's a large regional bank based in New York. Uh, but if you're more interested in learning more about automation and DevOps practices, I recommend you check out my team's blog, Red Green Refactor. So before I was in IT, I was a scientist for around a decade. I'm also an avid board gamer. You don't see it behind me today. You see a wall of books, but I have around 3,000 board games in my house and taking up multiple rooms. I'm also an evangelist for Ruby Cucumber. That's my primary tool set I like to use to enable behavior-driven development. And I have a lovely cartoon family here. They're upstairs remaining quiet during my presentation. Thank you very much. Let's drive into it. All right. I'm going to level set with you about finding a shared understanding of what is RPA, as well as why it's important within the industry, because you may have heard about various tooling or various companies going public. So why is this important for you to use? As well as some specific examples on RPA use cases and what you would do if you're going to go through the adoption of your team or an enterprise level. I'm then going to dive into a selection of those tools in the industry, some of which are listed on Gartner or Forrester research as being sort of leaders, as well as take you through some of the metrics that you would use to track at the beginning of your program or in a mature state. And I want to also mention that if you have any questions during the course of this presentation, feel free to ask in the chat. I can answer it during the course or right after we're finished. So first, let's set at what is robotic process automation, or RPA. So RPA is a term that's typically given to technology that allows those developers to programmatically emulate the actions of a human to execute a business process. So the variation from this compared to test automation is you're going to interact typically on a UI level to capture that data or to complete tasks. So rather than going through a validation, you're looking at executing a business process. Similar to test automation, though, we're looking at activities that are repetitive, that are time consuming, and finding a way for a bot to take over that versus having a human do that. This comes into place with some of our terminology that we care about. When I mention bot, what is a bot? A bot is a programmed sequence of automated activities performed by the tool. They can do something as simple as navigate to a web page, or as complex as provide a decision recommendation on a mortgage loan application. So it's not just about something that's traversing over a web application. You can go much deeper than that. And there are many different types of bots. So the two general categories that we're going to talk about today are attended and unattended bots. Attended bots mean the user is working with the process in the background, such as helping out with data entry assistance and onboarding a new employee for HR. Unattended bots mean the process is executing in absence of human interaction, such as processing invoices, and these will typically take place on servers separate from human activity. If we dive a little bit further into some of the categories of RPA solutions, you have four primary types, those being assisted. Those are bots that are deployed to a local human's workstation that can help with common tasks. Unassisted bots are deployed on a server and can be manually controlled. You have autonomous bots that cover more complicated processes that often have decision trees such as changing priorities based upon external input or workload balance. Think in terms of also like a listener waiting for an action to occur external and then acting upon it, as well as cognitive bots that are integrated with AI technologies such as machine learning and natural language processing. And this is where I have to also make that same delineation that Adam made in his earlier talk. When we say AI, we're using a little bit of branding here. I'll denote that delineation when we get to a certain set of tools that they may say they're AI, but it's really machine learning underneath the covers. So what are some of the benefits of RPA? Why is it so popular, and why is it something that you see across all industry types? Well, for one, it's got a fast return on investment, and that is because most of the commercially available RPA tooling has a lot of pre-built-in libraries that out of the box and very quickly you can get set up and automate a number of flows. You also have a minimal upfront investment for that proof of concept. Again, whether you're working with the tooling itself or going through a firm to help you out, it's very easy to set up. It's very easy to implement your first few flows and to see that immediate return on investment. You also have limited disruptions on the systems they interact with. They typically ride on top of existing systems, as in they work in the background of your own machine, or they work on servers. So they don't take an additional amount of infrastructure typically for the initial setup, but long term, you're going to want to have some form of orchestration. And the question always comes down to, like, do you buy it or do you build it? So there's some open source solutions that are available. Some have catered and changed the terminology, such as like robot framework that can assist with, building your own with open source. Buying the tools include those libraries that are very helpful. And that is because a lot of these firms work with many common industry types. So they build up a profile of, this is what a financial institution is, this is what a retailer is. And so they have those pre-built libraries that allow you to pretty much fill in the blanks and quickly build up your automation flows. So we go with low code or even codeless solutions to help you spin up RPA very quickly. Additionally, RPA can help you out in the space of errors and logging. So we want to know that we're making improvements over human data entry. We know that when we're doing things, we typically get bored, we easily make mistakes, so we want to have automated workflows handle it for us. The tooling itself, though, also provides logging activity. So we want to identify where we have failure points with this task-based automation so we can fix those exceptions. That activity logging also helps because you can ensure regulatory compliance. I'm not sure about the industries that you all work in, but in mine, which is heavily regulated, we need to show evidence, say, of our testing activities or evidence of due diligence we've taken in care of users' data. Being able to provide these activity logs to show that we have the necessary controls in place go a great deal towards minimizing our amount of time spent with internal auditors as well as external auditors. So there are a number of risks and rewards associated with RPA. So the risk, as I mentioned, is if you're working with these bots and these bots have access level that are similar to that of a human, then you risk revealing that personally identifiable information, especially if you're working with production data. You also risk violating SOX compliance if you're in the US. If you're outside the US, you likely have some form of responsibility that is either around personal identifiable information, card information, handling of financial information that you need to adhere to. And so the risk is you create these sort of super bots that have access that go far beyond what a typical human being would have. It can work across multiple systems. Having a bot with that level of access is a risk. So that way, people who could potentially gain access to the bot can use it for nefarious purposes. So I'll explain a little bit how you can address this in the future. The other is your program will never proceed beyond your initial or POC stage. And this is common, I would say, with most automation, not just RPA, but even test automation, where you'll set up an initial framework, automate your first few flows, but not have a real plan beyond that initial stage of how you're going to scale it across multiple teams, across your organization. Because RPA is not something that's just going to sit in the technology space. It's going to be applied across multiple business segments within your enterprise. Some of the rewards, as I mentioned, is your speed of processing time over those manual workflows. It's very easy to adopt. It's very easy to scale out. You can achieve that cost neutral status likely in the same calendar year that you choose to adopt an RPA solution. You can implement it across multiple business segments. So it gets you thinking outside the box. Typically, when we go to implementation, we think about purely within, say, the technology space. And we're always also thinking about either some automation related to builds or to testing. This is neither testing nor is it building. It's something that can apply to task-based automation that could help out people in marketing, that could help out individuals within human resources. Additionally, having these bots in place of these manual repetitive tasks will help reduce the errors. And as I mentioned before, you have that built-in logging capability for the failure analysis and regulatory compliance. So let's look at a few RPA use cases. What can RPA do for you? Well, for one, as a general rule, it can help you with repeatable, high volume, and business-centric tasks. Another common set of tasks could be logging into an application, moving files from one source to another, reading and writing to databases, opening emails and attachments, scraping data from web and desktop applications, connecting to APIs, processing content from PDFs. So this is something that I've seen beyond financial institutions, beyond retailers, to legal firms that can help out, to utility companies. It's pretty much, here's a task that humans do not like to do or are prone to error. All right, how can we make it easier by implementing a bot to take this over for them? So let me go in with some specific use cases. In this case, let's look at some text analysis. So we're able to scan documents such as insurance forms, purchase orders, invoices, emails, etc. So with HR, it can assist with the generation of payroll, employee and contractor onboarding, terminations, benefits administration, where we have to do the same sort of data entry again and again and again. For ops, it can help with your inventory management, invoicing, planning, and scanning of contracts. From the service desk, this can help with password resets, scheduling appointments, and address changes. And let me give a specific real-life example. At a prior firm that I worked for, anytime that either a colleague or a customer would call in because they needed to go through a password reset or they needed help with their account, that service desk analyst had to open up anywhere between 3 to 6 different applications to assist that person. This is something that takes time even when someone comes and validated. So we implemented a bot that upon validation of that customer would automatically open up those applications and navigate to that customer or colleague's information. So that way, if you want to do a password reset, very quick to do the validation, reset the password. If you have a problem with your transaction, very quick to get feedback on that. The time it would take to actually open those applications to assist the person was only on the order of, say, like 15 seconds per application is what it helped out with. You think, not that very much, just 15 seconds. However, let's multiply that 15 seconds by the thousands upon thousands of times that people would call in over the course of the year, and that quickly adds up. And that's really what you're looking to do, not just shave like hours or days or minutes off, but even something on the little scale of seconds can help, because the frequency with which you go through this activity matters as well. And that will help add up over time to the hours savings you're looking for. Another specific use case is with ATM data processing. So any time that you go through and you're looking at your batch process for one day over the next, we know that when we're processing the ATM data, it takes a great deal of time because there's a lot of information that's being transferred between those machines and back-end systems. So if we want to look at something, whether it's processing speed of those data records or reduce the time needed to handle that data or potentially look for fraud, we can have bots that help out with those activities that sit on top of those existing processes and help move things along. They can result in fewer errors and faster processing time of those workflows. Another instance that can be used in assistance of test automation is account creation. So this is also something that I can take from my prior work. Anytime that we would want to go through cradle to grave, that mortgage loan origination, working not only internally, but also with the various approvals that have to be external, it would take on the order of days to go through and generate an account and go through the approval process. And when you're going through that process, you're entering information into hundreds of fields. And if you want to look at various conditions, that's going to result in you needing hundreds of different accounts. So even if it only takes, say, 6 minutes per account, if you're doing it, but if you're going across multiple applications, it ends up taking up a lot of time. So if you have a RPA process that's in place that skips through multiple decision points around mortgage length, around those credit ratings, customer status, and whatever conditions that you can think of, you can go through and do the appropriate test data generation that reaches out to those external systems as well and generates the necessary test data for you to test at various points of that loan stage. So this can result in a reduction of processing time and the number of data entry errors that you'll end up having. So in this instance, because this is a multiple day long process, having RPA in place will help us stage all the data we need for our testing activities. So if you're going to go along on an RPA journey and you want to start off with maybe just your team, or you want to start with your organization, just go big at the beginning, what do you actually need to do? So here's what you need to build out a program. You start with a small proof of concept, and you need to align people, process, and technology to be successful. So what are the expectations? Your RPA solution should operate across the same layers of the application as a human worker. You should have libraries that integrate with the standard tech stack and reusable components. You should have it version controlled. Don't think of your RPA solution as something separate from a developed application. It is another application that should receive the same love and care as your development applications. You should set the level of internal technical prowess and determine, based upon the people you have within your organization, are you looking for people to do a lot of hands-on keyboard coding, a low-code solution, or maybe they haven't coded a line in their life and you want them associated with this program. That will determine what tool you're actually going to select. You're also going to look at standards in place for defect tracking and associated test coverage. You want to set those up at the beginning. You want to not only track the defects you create in writing those RPA processes, but also in determining what you can define for those applications that you're covering over the top of with your RPA flows. So when you are building, you should keep the enterprise in mind. So if your expectation is long-term to be an enterprise-wide deployment, then you have to care about scalability and deployment strategy as an upfront concern. So questions to ask yourself: are you going to run the bots on virtual machines or in the cloud? Are the bots going to be attended, unattended, or both? Will the platform support web services? Do you have a central app or application server to help orchestrate all of these flows? And what security standards do you have in place? A number of the tools that are in place today have an orchestrator. And I would say this is an absolute necessity if you're looking to expand your execution beyond, say, a single team. The purpose of an orchestrator is to track your execution, keep a separation of duties between multiple bots, maintain execution schedules that will keep those loads even across time, track your total execution time for your bots, log all events that occur, and support execute so that way you can quickly investigate. If you think about this, if you did not have an orchestrator in place, you will have various groups, multiple teams, each developing their own solution, each with varying levels of support as well as logging, and you kill off any chance you have for that reusability of flows that traverse across multiple application types. So you need to have some central form of execution to control this. Without execution, you have those runaway bots that are poorly tracked. So it's important to maximize your benefits by having flows that can be reused across multiple teams. So some words of warning. I mentioned this earlier, and I'm going to mention it again because this is where I see people really run the risk of failure. In that if you create bots that go across multiple application types and they have privileges that go far beyond that of a typical user, then those bots can be misused. That's why you want that orchestrator in place. So that way you can limit the access an individual bot has, and you can have that information passed between those bots. So multiple bots should be used to create the separation of duties. You should also try to have some degree of governance in place, at least at the same level as human workers, and use something like a credentials vault to help store this information, or use role-based access control. Include those activity logs that you have from the orchestrator and create audit trails. So that way you can ensure that you have the necessary controls in place to develop this solution. So when you're building out this team, what are some roles and responsibilities that you should look for? These can be people from within your organization as well as outside your organization to work on this initial POC. You need to look at it from the tactical as well as the strategic standpoint. From the tactical side, you need to have one or more RPA developers. These are individuals responsible for developing and testing those bots, scripting things out for you. You should also have an architect. This is someone who's going to design the solutions, select the tooling, establish guidelines for adoption across the enterprise. From the strategic side, you need to have a champion. So this is a person that is comfortable going with those C-level executives and talking to them to advocate for the RPA solution. I'm not sure about your circumstance or your company, but at almost all of the ones that I've worked at, you have these gigantic silos based upon business segments. So each one sort of acting like it's their own kingdom. Your solution needs to be something that's enterprise-wide. So you need to have that champion who's willing to go out to each one of those segments and advocate for why you need to adopt RPA. Here's the funding and the time that you need from members of the teams. And that is because from the strategic side, you are going to have RPA analysts. These are people who have domain knowledge about the business and are responsible for creating the process flows. The problem is, because these are so important people, they're likely going to be your source of system constraint, as in they will be booked up for other projects and activities and hard to get their time to help you out in building out these initial flows. So that's why the champion is important, to go and get the time of these RPA analysts who are going to help you out. These are the folks who you would be considered to be your SMEs, or subject matter experts, who are going to assist you out. Going beyond the people aspect, when we're selecting tooling, we have to make the right call. There's no one tool that is better than another. It's based upon your organization structure. What is going to be the best fit for you? So when you're looking for the right tool for the job, the key questions you should ask yourself when shopping is, will you want to pay on a per transaction or per process basis? Do you want to pay for fixed usage or variable usage capacity? Do you have access to training and documentation? What is the product support model? How often is the platform updated? What does their feature roadmap look like? Who are the business partners for these organizations, and can these pre-built libraries be used immediately? I'd say the last one is a key component, because many of the commercial tools available in the industry have relationships with other tooling firms in the industry, and you want to make sure that whatever you buy can fit neatly within the tech stack that's pre-existing. You want to minimize the amount of change that you have to undergo to implement this solution. As I mentioned, there are a lot of tools available on the market, and some of which are being bought up. And in fact, recently it was announced that Prism would be bought up by another firm. Softmotive was another firm that in 2020 was acquired by Microsoft to help with their Power Automate solution. So it's hard to say, all right, this is the tool I'm going to go with, or I'm going to do a POC with each one of these. You often don't really have the time to do so. So you want to have a sort of subset that match it. So here's a few that we would consider to be leaders within the industry. The first of which is Prism. So they have their own IDE that has a low technical hurdle compared to most traditional automation, but you do have to do some programming. The design of their IDE is very much a drag and drop, similar to like if you have experience with Visio diagrams, you're going to do the same thing here. Is here's an action, here's fill in the blanks for what sort of credentials you need to enter, or what you're looking for on the web page or the screen or the database. It also has Citrix and virtual desktop infrastructure integration. And I would say what you're going to find amongst the most popular tools in the industry is they will all offer third-party accreditation for certification, along with their own style of university programs. So they want to make sure that people become certified developers with their tools, so that way companies have confidence in hiring those individuals. Or if you're looking to upskill people within your own organization, you can have them go take the training and earn the certification. Automation Anywhere was a tool that was originally focused on desktop solutions, but they expanded their offerings to include most application types. You can build RPA workflows with a low technical hurdle, so low code solution. But if you want to build out more advanced workflows, you're going to need something like XML or C# experience. Again, it's not too in-depth. It just matters about the level with which you want to add test coverage to your RPA framework, as well as the logging activities associated with it. Automation Anywhere has a central control feature, that orchestrator we care about, that allows for scheduling and triggering capabilities. And they too offer accreditation for certification. So they're sort of another big boy on the block that's worthy a look if you're going through a POC. Power Automate, which is formerly called Flow, is a solution provided by Microsoft. And this sort of delves into a different region of RPA solution. I'd say this is more personal based, as in something that people would have as an attended bot that's working on someone's local workstation as opposed to like a server. And I'll give you an example for why in here is Microsoft is looking to have something that's easy for people to adopt right now. And if you're accessing this presentation right now from a Windows machine, you can actually pull up and start on a Power Automate flow locally. So what they wanted to do is implement a solution that has a low entry barrier. So anyone can start at no cost, and you can deploy this locally, and there's a vast amount of training and resources available online for you to get kicked off. Their platform, though, includes process discovery, automation ideation, ROI calculation, portfolio management. They also provide native support for OCR, which is optical character recognition, document handling, analytics, and I put this in quotes again. We go back to Adam's, branding on here. The AI builder has pre-built and customizable AI models for processing structured and unstructured content. And I'll provide an example of that shortly. So Power Automate, like many of the other popular tools in the industry, have those templates available to make it very easy for you to spin up and implement a flow. In this case, they've got 600 templates designed for a specific purpose. As you can imagine, a lot of the templates that they have in place are in that sort of Microsoft stack. So there's a template if you wanted to send yourself a text message when your boss emails you. So very useful, especially if you're out and about, you got something that's burning coming at you from the boss. And here's an example of what that flow would actually look like. So let's just say I want to make sure that anytime my boss emails me that I know and can respond as quick as possible. So this flow will leverage Office 365 and Slack. When you receive an email from your boss, the flow is going to send you a notification. So in Microsoft Power Automate, as well as many of the popular solutions, any action that will require developer input are automatically expanded out. And what you see on the right-hand side is an example of that very flow. Very simple box diagram that's saying, hey, on a new email, pull up my profile. I want the manager in place, so that way I can check to see, is this email from my boss, so my boss's email? If so, send me a Slack notification. If not, do nothing. And the only time you actually have to expand something out is when you actually have to do any sort of data entry for it. So it makes it very easy for you to build out a flow. Very much a fill-in-the-blank template for yourself. So the Power Automate flows, and you will see in each tool has similar set of flows that you can sort of pull out and just do fill-in-the-blanks for, have a lot of built-in services that will limit the additional programming needed. And that's why RPA has become very popular, is you don't have to worry about that sort of technical hurdle to be successful. So you can also take a peek, if you wanted to, in the code and do things more programmatic, as in make alterations to existing templates to go as deep technically as you want, but you're not required to. I mentioned earlier that we talk a little bit about the AI builder. So this is something where you've got multiple model types within Power Automate that you can use. Things that we will traditionally look for in the data science field, like category classification, language detection, prediction, form processing, object detection, etc. So you can do things like automate your expense reports, categorize user feedback based upon their focus, identify and classify customer feedback, identify fraudulent transactions, or get alerted to social media posts that reference your brand. I can provide another real-time example is we would have customers that would email us, and they originally would email analysts asking for specific information from Bloomberg machines that we had access to that they did not. Put a bot in place that would act as that listener that would wait for the customer requesting information. It would scan through that email, then access the Bloomberg machine, generate the reports that were needed to, and then send those to the analyst for an initial review, just to make sure that the bot did what it was supposed to do, that it pulled down the reports that match what the customer asked, and then it would send off those reports. So that's an example of something that is going to save you time, that it's looking for natural language processing, and ends up making it much easier because the customers are going to get a response more quickly. So this is the last example I'm going to give of a tool, and it's sort of the big boy in the space. So it's UiPath. So they also offer cloud orchestration, integration, testing, as well as AI. They have more than 3,000 clients, including many Fortune 500 companies. They were valued in 2021 at $35 billion. This last year hasn't been kind for a lot of the automation solutions. I believe they're now valued closer to $15 billion. So why has UiPath become so popular in the industry? Well, they've got good marketing program. So they got out there early with a lot of, say, professional groups and webinars to get access to that market. They put in place a robust and free training program. So if you wanted to become certified a few years ago, That certification was free. You just had to go through the training and take the examination. They have multiple tiers of their IDE to fit the technical skill set. That is to say, if you are a business analyst and you've never coded a line in your life, we have an IDE for you. If you are a developer who have experience over many years with multiple languages, we have an IDE that's going to fit your needs. And we will allow the transfer between one IDE to another of those flows that allows our analyst to develop something, pass it over to our developer to then build out the flow along with the necessary test coverage. UiPath also has support for most standard tech stacks with pre-built activities. So, at this point, because they are large and because they've built in a lot of these libraries for flows that you have specific use cases for, it becomes very easy to pull down and use those flows. And they've integrated with a lot of other technology firms just to make it very easy for you to fit UiPath within your tech stack. And they have Test Manager, which was released a few years ago after Ingo Philipp joined the company. And I'll explain that in a little bit. So as I mentioned, like UiPath went public last year. And why is this important though? Like, why would I care about like a company going public like this? Well, you saw how many I listed earlier in that tool comparison, and that some of the firms were being bought up. So you care about investing a tool that's going to be in it for the long term. You want to make sure that they have a good product vision and that the support will be in place for long term, and they're not going to be gobbled up by someone else and suddenly the tool will go away, or you're going to have to make a transition period to go to whatever new form of the tool is going to be. So you want to have someone who's always going to be a leader, and the leader is going to help you in the form of having those pre-built libraries, as I mentioned a few times. Having those pre-built libraries will drastically reduce the time that you take from ideation to implementation. So let's dive in to some of those examples. So this is the Studio Pro from UiPath that allows you to create automated tests. You can have a Studio X version for those less technically adept team members to create workflows and then import them into Studio Pro. And you can see it on the right-hand side that it's taking that format that you often see in like BDD style acceptance criteria of a given, when, then. You too can do that within UiPath, and you can have it be in a simple format for people to adopt. Their testing capabilities have activity coverage, so you can confirm that the activities you create also have appropriate test coverage associated with it. You can do support for other technologies. In this case, like you can have support with API testing via Postman, so you can import your collections from Postman. So having those integrations with other testing tools is important to making sure that your RPA solution can be successful because it fits neatly within your tech stack. And you have the Orchestrator. The Orchestrator is where we can execute those test cases as well as your flows. And the Studio Pro can execute via the Orchestrator. So you can kick off execution of those test cases and send a direct API call to your Orchestrator to do so and get feedback. So this way you don't have to worry about having all execution just be on your local machine. You can set up execution remotely. And I mentioned before with a couple of the features available that you've got natural language processing, optical character recognition, machine learning. It's pretty much whatever challenge you may have, whether it's web, desktop, database, mainframe, services. You want to be able to have the capability of finding a solution for it and having multiple paths to you having that solution in place. And that's really what a successful tool will do. It will give you that flexibility of choosing the path that will work best for you and your company. So the Test Manager tool can be used to help manage those tests, while the Studio Pro, the IDE, is for automating those tests. And then you have those Orchestrator and those robots that are there to help organize the test execution, as well as actually fulfill those tests. What we want to do is have an integration. We don't want to have multiple sources of truth. We want to be able to have a hub that can go back and update our project tracking tools. So that way we can say, hey, here's new defects that we found, or we have coverage of our requirements, or we just want to have logged information because we have to provide that information to internal audit or external audit. So having the full integration of your tech stack is vitally important. So the Test Manager allows you to do that. It has several connectors. These are libraries used to connect to external ALM tools. So that way you can synchronize between them. One of the most painful things is to have a tool that has, say, like your test cases and another one that also has reference to your test cases, but they're not connected. So you have to update both of them separately. We want to have synchronization between those tools. So that way we can find out that, yes, these test cases, whether they be manual or automated, once they're executed, they're updated in both places. Those automated test cases that are created in the Studio Pro can be linked back to the test manager. So we can execute, see success and fail. We can have those manual test cases be executed, show success or fail, attach screenshots if we wanted to, create defects from them. And we want to be able to quickly create those cases as well. So one of the cool aspects of this, and I'd say other tools in the industry, is the task capture. It's more trying to sit there with that subject matter expert, or trying for that subject matter expert to have a written report out for what exactly flow they need to automate. It's much easier if you have task capture baked in, which is going to document those flows without manually downloading the images or typing them in. So this will capture each step and take screenshots with every mouse click that'll collect the data along the way. This will allow you to quickly create those requirements you need for the automated flow that you can then publish, say, as a test case that you can have then someone work off of. So they can keep track pretty much of everything that you've done to more quickly create those requirements. From a testing standpoint, we care about some of the sort of essentials for any sort of test reporting tool. It's like, can we categorize it, like smoke test, regression, or a release? Can our orchestrator be used for the automated execution to provide a full report back? Can we include things of, when was it executed? Was it a pass or fail? How long did it take? What are overall results? Can I have a big visual that I can share with the management? And that's what you'd expect in any sort of test execution tool. And that's what's available for you here. So you want to be able to dive in further and see from the individual steps, where did I have that failure? What were the error messages? What are some screenshots at the point of the failure? So we want to match our RPA solution and expand for those testing capabilities, but not lose out on any of the functionality we expect from traditional automation. So when you're building out your program, you want to be able to check to say, yes, we're making progress, or exactly how well are we doing? So keeping track of your work is essential for this program, because your RPA solution is just like another application you're devoting time to develop. And you want to make sure for that time and resource investment that you're getting your money's worth. So what should you measure? The viability of that implementation, justifying your initial investment, making iterative improvements, helping making evidence-based decisions. What are some of the stages you can go through? Because at different points of your implementation, you're going to want to look at different things. So the initial pilot stage should measure your foundational work. Your mature stage should look at the long-term benefits with enhancements you can make. One of the challenges is understanding what exactly is the cost of doing business for activities. So say, for instance, to this point in time, you've always had people come in and, hey, you receive an email and you got to do data entry to a desktop application. You don't know exactly how long that takes because it's not something you've ever tracked. So you have to do a lot of back of the envelope calculations on about how much time did this take a person to do, and how many activities do they have to do it in a given day, in a given week, in a given month, in a given quarter. So this is not going to be an exact science when you're trying to determine what the cost of business is for certain activities. And then also in some instances, you're not going to know what their sort of error rate is, because they will go back and fix it later and it's not something that's captured. So you keep track of that as a back of the envelope, and you look at other things that can help you out, such as your adoption rate. So what is your initial set of RPA test cases that you can develop, and how many of you actually delivered? So that's your adoption rate. Your overall cost savings. By implementing the solution, are there other pieces of technology that you've been able to retire and reduce in tech stack size? So that's another benefit. Or are there equivalent people that you're accounting for now? In the example that I gave earlier about helping out with service desk analysts, it found that we ended up saving about 2 service desk analysts worth of time. That doesn't necessarily mean you reduce the staff size. It just means that their workload has become lighter so they could focus on more cognitively important tasks, and providing the faster feedback and resolution for customers as well as colleagues is another benefit. And that's where we go into time savings. So the time spent per workflow. We want to look at the time that you spent completing that workflow and the downtime and stages of the workflow that is reduced. going back to, again, one of my earlier examples of you have a 3-day long pipeline to complete mortgage loan origination. A lot of that is downtime where you're reaching out to third parties for approvals. I want to have a bot sitting there as a listener, waiting for that response and then continuing through, rather than a human waiting for that and maybe checking on it at a later point in time. It ends up taking longer for the human to do it versus a bot that is constantly listening. The output improvement is the pre and post implementation output for a workflow. So, as well as enhanced accuracy, which is the number of errors you have for a given workflow. And again, this is something that you may have to take an estimation on because you don't have that exact number. And that's okay. Just make sure you're upfront about reporting that within your organization. And lastly, security. So you want to look at the number of vulnerabilities measured and the number of controls in the bots versus people. If you can replace tasks that people are doing with bots doing them, but you have more controls on those bots than you do for people, you've therefore lowered your security profile. From the mature stage, we look at time to completion. So the time it takes to complete a process manually before and after implementation. And again, this is something where you may have to take that back of the envelope calculation on. As you get better as an organization, you'll have tasks that you have more defined data on at the outset. The task accuracy is to compare the rework time plus the cost of implementing that task. Your downtime reduction is the downtime needed to complete a workflow by humans versus that bot. Your employee happiness. This is one that I haven't mentioned up to this point in time, but it is actually quite critical. So you're going to survey those employees who are targeted to have RPA tasks implemented. Why is this a metric you should care about? Well, what I found from my own history is that anytime you go into work into a new team, you're going to say, we're going to implement some automation to do some of the tasks that you're doing today. That person's mind immediately goes to, I'm going to be replaced with a robot. And they will come back with either fear or some form of resentment because they think that they're going to be replaced. And it's not about replacing people. It's about taking away those repetitive, time-consuming tasks so they can do something that is better suited for a human being to do. And so you need to be upfront about what the overall purpose is of the program and what exactly you're automating and what they will be doing instead of those activities. So gauging their happiness before and after implementation is an important component of that. And then one other item you look at is that yearly compliance. So twice a year, I have to go in for compliance for our organization's testing activities. It's much easier if you have all of those audit-related activities assisted with the log information. So you can provide that to your auditors and save yourself some time and potentially a reduction in regulatory fines because you show that you have the necessary controls in place and you're keeping track of the necessary data you need to. So whichever one of these or set of these that you actually look for, it's just important to make sure that your progress should be visible. So it should be easily trackable, accurate, consistent, and objective. You want to focus on key operation metrics like the utilization of the bots and capacity versus the manual tasks you have. Most of those commercial tools in place have baked in analytics capabilities. So why not use them within the orchestration tool rather than have it be data that is just simply lost to the aether? What are some of the key takeaways we've had in today's session? Well, there's a few things that we need to keep track of. One of those is simply that anytime you have people that are sponsoring POC for an RPA project, you need to have those sponsors work side by side with the development team in implementing the solution. So you can build a shared understanding on what success looks like and what are those key performance indicators. You want the RPA team to maintain a consistent pace of work, just like any application development team. You'll reach a point when you're building this out for your team or for the enterprise where you'll have many more flows, use cases coming in than you can possibly automate. You need to build the program at a steady, successful rate, targeting reuse for certain flows over reaching into new space. So that way you build up a successful body of work that you can then extend out to additional flows. And no one metric that I showed you today is going to determine success or failure of a program. The telemetry should be used as context to drive decisions rather than as a target, because as soon as you attach targets to it, people are going to automate to hit those targets rather than for improvement of your team or your company. So if you're interested in learning more about RPA, I've included this presentation on SlideShare. And also there's a chapter in a book that I co-wrote with Aaron Kinsbrunner and a few others that has to do with RPA. You can feel free to check that out. And if you liked a lot of the images that I showed in this presentation, I recommend you check out Ineffable Solutions. So a colleague of mine, Damien Sinadinos, did a lot of the water art on that. The other ones that you saw were, of course, taken from classical art. So thank you very much for your time.